Hello, it's Deborah from the attic, and today we're going to talk about many layered junk tags. These are great fun and they're a really nice way of using up any old cardstock and papers that you may have. I've gathered a paper bag, I've got some recipe sheets that I usually get with a veg box delivery once a week, I've got some cards and some paper stock left over from various projects and kits, and I've got a little piece of tracing paper there. And these are just really nice pieces of paper that I think colour wise will work together well, and I'm going to cut them out, but I'm going to use a template that I've made for myself. This is a tag template. I've put my sizes down the side and along the bottom there. I've popped a little hole in the top, but essentially this is a rectangle with the two top corners cut off. I've laminated this because that makes it stronger for me to draw around and also means that it will last me more than one project. Let's start with the recipe card then. I'm going to lay my tag down on the part of the recipe or the part of the message that I want to draw over, and then I'll draw around the outside of my tag and then I'll cut it out. So that's my first tag complete, and now I'm going to go and cut out all of the little bits of paper that I want from these waste bits of card and paper. So that's how they look when they're all gathered together, a really exciting pile to begin working with. But to add texture and dimension, we need to make sure that each layer is slightly smaller than the layer that it sits on top of. Now I've started with the same size of tag because I'm quite happy just to rip and cut things down as I go along. But if you want, you could make more than one template of tag, and you could make a small and a medium one. Depending on the types of paper that you have, you might have a really soft paper, like this bag was really soft, so that's easy for me to scrunch up, and I can just crunch it up in my hands, and that will give it lots of nice texture. So when I open it out, it looks a little bit different. Then you can ink over the top of this, so you ink over those creases if you want to add even more to it. With my next one, I'm taking a water pen. This has just got plain water in it, and I'm adding some water around the edges because this makes it much easier to take what is a stiffer card and roll the edges in my fingers and generally distress those edges. Much easier if it's water softened first. Another way you can add interest and distress the edges is, instead of using scissors to cut down the smaller tags to layer on top of each other, you can use a ruler and rip against the edge of the ruler, and then use the water pen as before to roll in those edges and distress them a little bit more. You can also add shimmer around the edge of your tags. So I'm using a product that I'll link to below, but it's something that will add a little bit of glimmer and glitter to the outside of this tag. But use whatever you have to hand. If you've got some embossing glitter, use that. If you've got a glitter pen, use that. Or just glitter and glue around the outside edge. I've focused on the outside edge because that's the bit that will be visible when all of the little tags are layered up together. This piece of card is quite stiff, so I'm going to give it a spritz with some plain water, although you can use a mixture of water and glycerin, where you use 1 part of glycerin to 5 parts of water. That will soften the paper enough for you to be able to scrunch it up as I'm doing here. And then when you open it out flat and leave it to dry, it's got lovely texture and creases in it. Each of these different layers is starting to take on a real interest now. I'm scrunching up a piece of very thin tracing paper here, and tracing paper is fabulous for getting lots of bulky texture in. So if you want your tag to sit quite tall or be quite fat, it's a good idea to add in layers of tracing paper because they will help give it height. And to add interest to the edges, I'm going to use my ruler technique again, and I'm just going to rip down against the ruler. This gives it a nice fluffy feathery edge. I've continued to rip and distress the edges of about 7 or 8 pieces of card and paper here, and now I have another piece of tracing paper which I'm going to add, and this is going to be my final layer. And as you can see, each piece is slightly smaller than the one below, which means that you get loads and loads of dimension and texture into your tags. It's just a big pile of taggy loveliness. Now we can work on colouring these up and adding extra glitter and ink effects. I've got Distress Oxide ink here. I'm just going to decide which of these colours I'm going to use. I'm going for the lighter one. And I've got a white piece of paper underneath to stop me making any mess on my mat below. And I'm going to just drag my Distress ink around the outside edge of my tag. And I've got a little foam dabber thing. These are actually called oral swabs. I use these because they're much cheaper than anything else I could find, and I'm going to use that to add colour around the outside edge, and it's a great way to pick up all of those creases and texture that you've put into each layer. And I'm going to select some of my other pieces of paper that I've cut from a bag and do exactly the same effect on those. And I'm going to work through each of my layers, deciding what effect I'm going to add to all of them. So on some of them I'll add a little bit of ink, and on others I'll add a little bit of glitter. This is a product I was using earlier. It's called Cosmic Shimmer Glitter Kiss, and this is a gold colour, and it's like glitter that's suspended in glue. But as I said earlier, just use whatever comes to hand. I've had this particular pot of glitter glue stuff sitting on my desk for quite a long time, and this is an excuse to give it an outing. The only reason that I'm using one of my oral swabs instead of the applicator that comes with the pot is because I feel it gives me a little bit more control. With the individual tags finished, I'm now going to layer them up, and as I add them into the pile, I'm going to add a little bit more distressing. So for example, I'm just going to roll down the corners of one of the tags so that they wrap around the tag above them. And I've decided that I want to add a tiny little bit of word stamping onto some of my layers. And I'm only going to add the words at the bottom of some of the tags, not all of them, just one or two, so that as they're layered up, you might see a little text popping through from below. I want to show you a way that you can complete your tag with some embellishments. I've got a selection of little buttons, they're in different sizes, and I've got an emboss it pen, and I've also got some Wow embossing ink. If your button is flat enough to take enough embossing ink just by pressing it into the pad, that's great. If not, you might want to use the emboss it pen, because that will get into detailed areas that the pad couldn't reach into. I'm going to cover these with a mixture of gold and silver, which creates pewter. It's a mixture I've done myself and I use it quite a lot. And then I'm going to, when I can find the buttons in amongst all of that embossing glory, I'm going to pull them out and I'm going to heat set them. I'm going to heat my gun to the owl stage on my hand, and then I'm going to aim it at the buttons. Be aware that some of the powder will blow away just because of the force of the blast from the heat gun. The beauty of embossing things like this that don't actually match each other properly is you tie it all together with a unifying colour. I've got my tags all in a row lined up on top of each other, and I've got a piece of ribbon that I'm going to water and then scrunch up, and I'm going to use this to go through the hole in the top of my tag. I have a crocodile which will help me cut through all of these layers and create a nice hole. If you don't have a crocodile, just get something sharp and pointy and force it through. That's how we used to have to do it in the olden days before they kindly invented crocodiles for us. Now I can poke the ribbon through. I've tied a little bow in the top and I'm going to position my buttons. I've added some thread, I've popped it through the holes in the buttons, and I've tied really big generous bows on those because the extra thread makes it look a little bit more ethereal and floaty. I'm going to hold those down using some glue until they stick in place. For my second tags, here are all the papers prepared, and I've added some stitching just down the sides and the bottom of a few of the layers, not every single one. And this is how I'm going to add it together. You can see, I hope, the stitching going around the edges there, and I've left lots of overhang where the threads have started and finished. I'm going to create a little fold of paper at the top. So I've cut down two little pieces, layered them on top of each other, and I'll fold them over the top of the tag. Eventually, I'll punch a hole through all of those layers. To hold the layers in place while I look for my punch, I'm going to use a line of tape glue on each of the layers. Now I can use the largest hole on my crocodile and punch it straight through the centre of my tag. I've got some thin thread here, but if I fold it over twice, I will give it a little bit of extra thickness. And I'm going to pop that through the hole I've created, and I'm going to tie a knot, and I'm going to draw the knot to the front of the tag, and then I'm going to leave the little loose bits just dangling. There are a number of ways you can decorate the front or the top of your tag. I've got 3 little die cut snowflakes cut from plain white card, and I'm going to stick them in the middle of my tag. You can also decorate these any way you choose. I have some sequins and I also have some little crystal jewels, and I was trying to decide which of these I was going to use, and then I decided that I would use both. I'm going to add a little dot of glue into each of my snowflakes, and I'm going to add a sequin, and then I'm going to add another dot of glue into the centre of the sequin and add one of the smallest of the crystal jewels that I have on top of that. That tag is now complete and it's got some nice sparkle on the front of it. I did another tag using more sepia tones where I added some glitter around the outside edges, and I also added a layer of ink to the scrumpled up tracing paper below. And then I completed the top with a tag that I stamped using a Christmassy sentiment. So that's all of our 3 tags that we've made today. I'm going to say thank you very much for watching as always, and I'm going to leave you with a little music and some close-ups of all of the tags that we've made today. And until we meet again, take care.